There is a quiet moment that happens to almost everyone now. You're standing in a grocery store. Your cart looks exactly the same as last week. Same milk. Same eggs. Same coffee. And yet the total is higher. Not dramatically higher. Not enough to scream. Just high enough to make you pause. That pause is the story. Because what's happening in the American economy right now isn't just inflation. It's not just corporate greed. And it's not just supply chains or labor costs either. What we're watching is something more structural, more technological, and frankly more disturbing. Prices are no longer prices because they have become algorithm predictions. For most of modern American history, pricing worked on a simple social contract. You walk into a store. You see a price. That price applies to everyone. It didn't mean the price was fair. It didn't mean companies weren't profit-seeking. But it meant the transaction was legible. That legibility mattered. It created trust. You could budget. You could compare. You could decide to walk away. That entire structure is quietly dissolving because we are entering the age of dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing, by itself, isn't new. Airlines figured this out decades ago after deregulation in the late 1970s. Hotels followed in the 1990s. Car rentals did the same. The logic sounded reasonable. Prices go up when demand is high. Prices fall when demand is low. According to industry data, early airline yield management systems boosted revenues by 6 to 8% annually, purely through timing and seat optimization. Hotels reported similar gains in revenue per available room. At that stage, prices still responded to markets. Same plane. Same seat. Same price, at least for everyone booking at that moment. That distinction matters. The real break didn't come from airlines. It came from data. E-commerce platforms realized something profound in the early 2000s. If you could observe user behavior quietly, you didn't have to price for demand. You could price for conversion probability. That is the moment pricing stopped being collective and became individual. By the mid-2000s, studies already showed that identical products could vary 5 to 15% in price depending on browsing behavior, location, or device type. At the time, companies called this testing. What they were really doing was training. Fast forward to today, and the language has changed. We no longer talk about discounts or promotions. We talk about AI-powered pricing optimization. A McKinsey study estimated that AI-driven pricing systems can increase company revenue by up to 15%. That number matters, because it explains everything. If you're a public company under margin pressure, a 15% revenue lift without building a single new product is irresistible. And this is where surveillance pricing enters. Prices are adjusted not just by time or demand, but by your zip code, your purchase history, your device type, your loyalty status, and how often you hesitate before clicking buy. Consumer Reports found price differences of up to 116% for the same online product depending on buyer location. That is not simple supply and demand. For a long time, companies were careful to apply these techniques to things people could avoid, like flights, hotels, concert tickets, and ride-hailing. You could always choose not to go. That line is now being crossed. Major retailers are rolling out digital price tags that can change prices within minutes. Not weekly. Not daily. Minutes. Grocery prices can now fluctuate based on time of day, store traffic, weather, or local demand spikes. Researchers have already documented grocery price variation of up to 23% among different users viewing the same item at the same time. And unlike flights, food is not optional. That distinction changes everything psychologically. Here's the part economists often miss. Dynamic pricing doesn't just raise prices. It raises anxiety. When prices stop being stable, consumers lose the ability to plan. When consumers can't plan, they become defensive. When they become defensive, they reduce spending, even if they can afford it. This is why surveys now show that over 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, even as corporate profits remain near historic highs. It's not only because incomes are lagging. It's because the mental cost of consumption has exploded. People aren't just paying more. They're constantly wondering whether they're being targeted. Uber's surge pricing taught an entire generation that prices could double or triple instantly. Between 2022 and 2025, Uber's take rate in the US rose from 32% to 42%, while driver earnings failed to rise proportionally. That tells you exactly who the algorithm was working for. Independent analysis even found cases where rides cost up to 6% more when a user's phone battery was below 15%. Whether intentional or emergent doesn't matter, the incentive structure is clear. What AI changes is scale. Old pricing systems needed human oversight. AI systems don't sleep. They test continuously. They learn continuously. They adapt continuously. And crucially, they do it invisibly. You don't see the experiment. You only feel the result. At that point, the question stops being, is this efficient, and becomes, what does a price even mean anymore? Because once you strip away the jargon, AI pricing is not just an efficiency tool. It is a shift away from markets that coordinate behavior, towards systems that manipulate it. And systems built on manipulation don't stabilize. They escalate, until they snap. Classical economics assumes something very basic: prices transmit information. High prices signal scarcity. Low prices signal abundance. Consumers respond. Producers adjust. That loop only works if prices are public, comparable, and stable enough to interpret. AI pricing breaks all three. When two people see two different prices for the same product at the same moment, price stops being a signal. It becomes a private message. And private prices don't coordinate markets. They fragment them. You can't comparison shop if you don't know what comparison even means. You can't wait for a better deal if the deal depends on who you are, not when you buy. Once that happens, markets don't become more efficient. They become opaque. And opacity is poison to trust. Here's a truth that rarely gets stated plainly. AI pricing systems are inherently regressive, even when they don't intend to be. Why? Because price discrimination works best on people who have fewer options, less time, and less information. If you have flexibility, you can wait. If you have money, you can absorb swings. If you have knowledge, you can game the system. But if you're hourly, tired, rushed, or desperate, the algorithm learns that too. Studies of ride-hailing, airline booking, and online retail consistently show the same pattern. The people least able to delay purchases pay more often and pay more consistently. Not because they're targeted maliciously, but because the model rewards willingness to pay under pressure. In other words, the algorithm doesn't ask, is this fair? It asks, will they still click? And that question always hits hardest at the bottom. Why this is not just like sales, or just like negotiation, defenders of AI pricing often say, this is how markets have always worked. People negotiate. Prices vary. That argument fails for one reason: symmetry. Negotiation assumes both sides know the rules. Sales assume everyone sees the sale. Markets assume shared visibility. AI pricing removes symmetry. The buyer does not know the rule set. The buyer does not know the alternatives. The buyer does not even know that an experiment is happening. That's not a market, rather it is like a behavioral lab. And in any other context, medicine, finance, law, running experiments on people without consent would be illegal. But pricing slipped through, because it hides inside optimization. Here is the strategic error companies are making. They are modeling short-term extraction, not long-term demand health. Yes, AI pricing can raise revenue by 10 to 15%. Yes, it improves margins in quarterly reports. But it also teaches consumers something dangerous: never trust the price. Once that lesson is learned, behavior changes permanently. People delay purchases. They abandon carts. They reduce discretionary spending. They stop browsing for fun. This is already visible. U.S. consumer sentiment surveys show rising pessimism even during periods of nominal wage growth. Retailers report higher traffic but lower conversion. Service industries see customers showing up less often but spending more defensively when they do. When every transaction feels like a trap, people opt out. There is a psychological breaking point that spreadsheets don't capture. People can tolerate high prices. They can tolerate low quality. They can even tolerate unfairness. What they cannot tolerate is uncertainty combined with suspicion. When every purchase feels like a potential trick, consumption stops being pleasurable. It becomes stressful. And stress is incompatible with a service economy. This is the same dynamic that hollowed out airlines. The same dynamic that poisoned cable TV. The same dynamic now hitting streaming services. Once customers feel managed rather than served, they disengage emotionally, long before they disengage financially. And emotional disengagement is fatal. This is where the story turns political, whether anyone wants it to or not. Because when pricing stops being transparent, it stops being a private matter. Governments do not regulate prices out of ideology. They regulate prices when social trust erodes. We have already seen early signals. Calls to restrict dynamic pricing for essential goods. Investigations into algorithmic discrimination. Proposals requiring price disclosure transparency. Once groceries, housing-related services, healthcare, and transportation are involved, this becomes unavoidable. And here's the irony, the more aggressively companies push AI pricing now, the harsher the eventual backlash will be. Because when trust collapses, regulation does not arrive gently. At the heart of this system is a contradiction companies cannot resolve. AI pricing requires maximum personalization. Markets require shared reality. You can have one. You cannot have both. A society where everyone pays a different price for essentials is not a market economy. It is a surveillance economy. And surveillance economies don't create abundance. They create resentment. AI pricing will not destroy capitalism. But it will force a correction. Either through regulation, through consumer revolt, or through demand collapse. Prices cannot function as secret negotiations forever. Eventually, people stop playing. And when they do, it won't look like a crash. It will look like quiet withdrawal. Less trust. Less spending. Less joy. A service economy that optimized away the very thing it depended on. The willingness of people to participate without fear. Prices used to answer a simple question, how much does this cost? Now they answer a darker one, how much can we get away with? That difference is small in code, but enormous in consequences. And once consumers fully understand that shift, the system will have to change. Whether companies are ready or not.